comments? You're live.
All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me this evening. I'm Jason Molino. I'm the Tompkins County Administrator. For some of you that don't know me, as the County Administrator, I'm responsible for the day-to-day operations of the county and ensure that all our county residents are able to access the services we provide in a fair and consistent manner. In a bit, I'll be discussing some of those services as well as your responses and feedback to a survey we put out over the past week, specifically focusing on law enforcement services in our community. But before we get to that, I want to share with everyone what you can expect from tonight's forum. Since the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and tragically others, communities across the nation have been calling for a review and reimagination on how our governments provide law enforcement services to our constituents. Much of this focus has been centered around the inequities in the way our criminal justice system as a whole has failed members of our communities, particularly people of color, creating injustices and racial disparities. And unfortunately, as you may know, these instances have resulted in unnecessary deaths. This has triggered a movement across our nation and the globe like none other in recent history, demanding our focus and attention in how communities can ensure all residents are treated equitably and with human dignity. Tonight is the second public presentation of information regarding a public safety reform collaborative between Tompkins County, the City of Ithaca, and all the municipalities in Tompkins County. While this collaborative has been created to specifically address and develop a foundation for reviewing and with your efforts, reimagining how we provide law enforcement services to our residents in the future. For me and my colleagues at Tompkins County, it's a lens that we intend to look through as we consider how we deliver all of our services to our residents. My perspective with this initiative is that it is the first step to a longer stairwell of change, not only for law enforcement, but for all county services. So I thank you for joining me tonight. I look forward to working with you in the future. I want to give first a brief overview, though, of what's happened to date. In June, Governor Cuomo created Executive Order 203, requiring all municipalities in the state to develop police reform plans by April 1st of 2021. As I mentioned, I think this is the first step of many to come in future months and years as we look to reimagine our law enforcement services, as well as other collaborative services that are needed to best serve the community. One thing to point out is that every municipality in Tompkins County that has a police department, including the Tompkins County Sheriff's Office, has to submit their own police reform plans. That means the plan for Groton may be different than the plan for the City of Ithaca, which may be different than the plan in Trumansburg. Nonetheless, this collaborative is intended to engage the Tompkins County community as a whole, to inform, to provide feedback, and assist the municipalities as they develop their own plans. This session is to provide a foundational knowledge about Tompkins County services, in addition to sharing insights about the feedback you provided us over the past week. We'll continue to solicit this feedback beyond tonight, and our survey is going to continue to stay open. We're using this feedback to inform the process as well as outcomes as we move forward in evaluating our law enforcement services. So with that, I'm going to continue to ask you to stay engaged. There will be public forums in the near future that will be structured much differently than this session tonight, providing opportunities for two-way dialogue and exchanges. And I know many of you are interested and eager to participate. So I thank you in advance for your patience, your interest, and your engagement. I'm going to echo Mayor Merrick from the City of Ithaca and his conversation he had with you back in August. I'm going to ask you to please continue to pass the word around and invite others to participate. If there are folks around that aren't here as part of this conversation, invite them and have them join us. The more feedback we receive, the better the process will be and the better the outcome will be. Also, I know there are other community groups that are meeting to discuss these issues. Let me know. I'd love to come participate, listen, and engage with you so we can have this become a better process at the end of the day. Our goal here is to have a collaborative process to look at our local policing services, look at our local resources, and identify our local solutions. Our outcomes here may be different than other communities across the state and the nation. That's perfectly okay, as we want to be able to use our resources that we have available to us in our community for our solutions. Before we start, I again want to thank you for your time and your interest for making our community better. And lastly, if you have questions throughout this presentation, please feel free to post them in the chat box, and we'll be responding to them on the county webpage in short time. From this point forward, I'm joined here with Dominic Racchio behind the scenes, our communications director here at Tompkins County. He's going to go through the deck slide slowly, but it's just some basic information. What we were able to do is summarize the responses that we got, the feedback we received from the public for that survey. Before we get into that real quick, we do have an interactive page on the website. This is a snapshot of it, and it shows basically the ability for you to click on different law enforcement agencies throughout the county, and it'll show you their area of responsibility. We're going to try to expand upon this. Right now, their badges are on for those jurisdictions are identified on this interactive interface. But in the future, we hope to add more, such as their uniforms and so on and so forth, and more information about their specific entities. But this helps you just get an understanding of the different jurisdictions and the different law enforcement agencies that we have in the county. Most of the folks that completed the survey did look at a presentation that we put together that had information about our public safety departments. And as you can see in this slide, they're highlighted: the sheriff's office and jail, district attorney, assigned counsel, probation and community justice, and emergency response. Those are our public safety departments. You can see in the shaded area, there are other departments that the county has. We have nearly 30 departments. Over the course of the next weeks and upcoming weeks, we're going to update that original presentation to include and incorporate in the same format these other departments. And the reason for that is what we're going to find out is that a lot of these services are going to be important parts of the discussion when we talk about reforming law enforcement. It's very possible that they may become part of the solution. They may want to be enhanced. We may need to want to put more resources towards them. They may also support or supplant, depending on the conversation, what we feel is best for the community. So getting an understanding and the background of what those services are and what we provide will be important as we have these conversations moving forward. So for example, mental health services, social services, Office of Human Rights, Veteran Services, Youth Services, all parts, I think, of the conversation and how we look at a continuum of care that we're looking to provide our residents. One thing I'll also add is these services very much will play a role in preventative measures that we may be able to take to prevent the need for law enforcement response, whether it's mental health services, substance abuse services, whether it's homelessness and other social services or human services we provide. So getting a good foundation of them and what we currently provide, as well as supporting agencies that we partner with, I think will help enhance the conversation as time moves on. Again, this is just a summary of our public safety services. That was the basis for the survey that we put out. All right, so now I'm going to get into some of the questions. I believe there are only 8 or 9 questions. Again, this forum tonight isn't intended to be incredibly long, but just to give you some basic results or feedback from the information that was provided to us. I'll say this. We had to stop, obviously, and collect the information we had at a moment in time. And at that point in time, we had 140 responses. I know we have had considerably more responses to the survey, but the information that we're going to provide tonight includes just those 140 responses. What we'll do over time, as more folks continue to respond to the survey, we will update this presentation. But this first question is, where do you live in Tompkins County? A good portion of the responses were from the more dense area, which is the city of Ithaca and town of Ithaca. I'll say we added a question in here that if you don't live here but you work here, we still want to know that. During the week, you may spend more waking hours in Tompkins County, and from our perspective, that means you're still part of the community. Again, have you reviewed the document outlining county public safety departments? Here, over 90% of the folks said they did review it. I will say, obviously, the vast majority of those comments were related primarily to the sheriff's office and our law enforcement service, but nonetheless, I was glad to see that a good portion of the respondents had reviewed the document that we provided. What does police reform mean to you? Redistribution of resources. Focus on fairness and equity in practices. Address inconsistencies in policing practices. Increased accountability and training. invest in the current system to enhance abilities to meet capacity needs, and limit the role of police in various response situations. So in terms of this question, again, these were categories that were pulled from the comments because there were a lot of written comments, so we tried to categorize them with commonalities, but already you're starting to see some good foundation of future discussions, and I think what we'll have when we have future subcommittees and public engagement to build off of is, what does police reform mean to you? What challenges or concerns do you have with public safety practices, policies, and procedures in Tompkins County based on your or other experiences? Who's driving or should drive the conversations, public opinion and or professional expertise? It's a good question. It's a very good question. Inconsistent practices and perceptions of practices. Some argue there is over-policing, some suggest understaffing. Hiring practices, employment arrangements, unions, and morale of departments. Bias, racial profiling, and cultural insensitivity concerns. Police responding to calls that could be handled by other professionals. Law enforcement react rather than proactively prevent crime. So this provides some really good basis of feedback. One thing I do want to mention that I think is important to understand as we go through this process. I mentioned earlier about local resources and local solutions. And I think that is very much true and will be a dominating factor when we talk about what works for our community. One thing I do want to bring up, though, is that we're not alone in this and that we are going to need the support from the state of New York. So when we look at one of these categories, hiring practices, employment arrangements, unions, or collective bargaining agreements, we may identify barriers or obstacles to being able to do this work better. And from a government perspective, the civil service process governs 90% of the employee base that both the city, the county, and towns and villages employ. So there may come out of this barriers that we identify in hiring. There may come out of this barriers that we identify in the collective bargaining process that need to be improved. And as we identify those, we're going to have to reach out to our state representatives and engage with the state of New York to say, listen, if you want us to be able to make substantial changes, you're going to have to change as well in terms of some of these rules and regulations and laws. And I think that's just an important part, just one of the elements that have come out of this question. How familiar are with local law enforcement policies and procedures? Average response was 3, and that seemed to be the most common response. So I don't know how much this tells us, other than I think some people feel comfortable, some people don't, but they have some level of familiarity. I'll also say, just on that last slide, enforcement policies and procedures. I'm going to talk about it at the end of this presentation shortly, that you're going to have an upcoming opportunity. Our Sheriff Osborne, as well as Chief Nair from the City of Ithaca, are both going to give separate presentations on law enforcement policies and procedures in the upcoming week or two. And that'll hopefully give some folks a better foundation and feel more comfortable answering this in a more favorable, in terms of being more familiar with some policies and procedures. Thanks. To the extent that you are familiar with any law enforcement policies and procedures, what changes would you recommend? Address the culture of police departments and relationships with the community. Consider different tools and how tools are used, including demilitarization. Who else can respond to certain situations, and what resources do they need? So here again is some common insights, and that we're talking about other resources that can be either added to law enforcement, enhance, or supplant law enforcement services to provide the best needs for our public. What are your ideas for enhancing community engagement between police, sheriff's department, and the community, and Tompkins County community, excuse me? Assess and better implement community policing model. Reduce carry of guns or presentation of weapons. This has to do with law enforcement. Better inform the community about policies and procedures, and give community members review and accountability measures. Again, I know both the police chief from Ithaca as well as our Tompkins County Sheriff will be having an information in a public forum in the next week or two to discuss a little bit more about policies and procedures. What resources do you think are needed to address systemic challenges and inequities within the criminal justice system in Tompkins County. Cultural responsive training, collaborations with community organizations. Seek more involvement from and respect input from people of color in the community. Increased funding, responsibility for social services, mental health services. Increased funding resources for law enforcement agencies. And consistent and equitable accountability across criminal justice systems. So you have a span here of insights with respect to this question, which I think add a lot of value. You've got increased funding and responsibility for additional services outside law enforcement, support for law enforcement, but also looking at the criminal justice system as a whole, which spans well outside just law enforcement agencies. It talks about the court systems, prosecution, public defense, and a mirage of other services. So that in and of itself is the summary of the questions that we provided, that we asked the public to participate in, and the survey results. And as I said, as we continue to get those results in, we will update them on the webpage. I just want to close here. I don't have any more with the presentation in terms of data to support, but I do want to make you aware of some upcoming events. Policing practices and procedure forms. So like I mentioned, Chief Nair from the police department will be providing a presentation on October 20th, and then the Sheriff Osborne providing a presentation on October 22nd, and that information will also be sent out on a press release as well. Former New Jersey Attorney General will also be speaking on a Camden, New Jersey case, and that's a case that's an interesting story if you're not familiar with it. I encourage everyone to tune in. It's a circumstance in where a community had to make some significant changes. It also talks about how they went about those changes in partnership with the state of with the state of New Jersey, and how they also played an important role to ensuring that those changes could take place. Ongoing community output, we're going to start to have some community forums and community engagement sessions in the near future, starting in the month of November. To the extent that the structure will be, what they'll look like, how big they will be, and I don't quite know yet. Both the city and the county are working collaboratively to try to determine what will be the best formats for those. But there will be some of those will be facilitated, some of them will be in larger groups, and some of them will be in smaller groups. But I encourage all folks to be able to stay in tune. We'll continue to make those announcements as they come, so that the public is informed. One question just came up, and I think I'll answer it publicly if that's all right. Can you give a sense of the meeting to be held in the next few months? For example, frequencies, who will be facilitating? Will community groups be presenting? Will groups as police unions be speaking? Good questions. I can tell you now that we are in the process of trying to outline what some of those community forums will look like. I can tell you that all of the groups you mentioned are groups that we want to receive feedback from community groups to police unions. The format in which we do that yet is something we're still going to try to figure out, but I want to say in the next few weeks, we'll have more announcements of the next series of forums and when they'll come up in the upcoming month or so. So I request just that you stay tuned. Appreciate your patience as we go through this and we start to develop the structure of it. On that note, I guess I'll end with this, and that police reform, and essentially reform and a lot of our county agencies and services, is something that is on the priority list for me as a county administrator. It's on the priority list of the leadership of the legislature and the legislature as a whole. And it's a commitment that we're making to the community. And that includes our sheriff, that includes our district attorney, our assigned counsel, our probation, that includes our social services and all our department heads, as we look through a different lens moving forward and ensuring that we're providing equitable services to our residents and our community members. So I end with this. I thank you for tuning in. I appreciate the feedback that you've provided us to date, and we'll look forward to more of that. I also will offer my availability as community groups continue to meet and have discussions. If you'd like to, I'd be happy to join you, listen, engage, and receive that feedback so we can make this process more informative and the outcomes better. Again, thank you very much for tuning in. I wish you all the very best, and look forward to seeing you shortly. Thank you.